owners and executives. The second thing is that income gap can drive your key employees to competitors that offer, more or better supplemental retirement plans or executive benefit plans. And then what happens when that key employee leaves? Your clients can leave with that key employee. Sales can be adversely affected. When sales decrease, the banks can tighten their credit. And then other employees are probably wondering, well, why did Dave leave? So it's important to make sure you kind of get the executive to buy in on why you're doing this. In the fact finder, the next page, it's imperative that you do a really solid fact finder. And the way I always looked at it when I did fact finders with business owners, or if I go out with an agent on a fact finder, is this gives the owner an opportunity to talk about himself, his baby, which is the business. Let him brag about what he's built. Don't look at this as a negative, because when you get a business owner involved in a fact finder, it's his opportunity to talk about what he's built, and how proud he is, and what's going on with his company. I encourage you to use one of our prepared fact finders. For those of you that have been doing this a long time and maybe have memorized or are comfortable using an OPAD, go for it. But the fact finder is laid out in a good, succinct, easy to follow deal. And again, you're just firing questions to the owner and letting him talk about how great his company is. But it's very difficult for us to solve your solutions, to give you a solution, because every business is different. Every solution is different. And the more information we have on that fact finder, the better job we're going to be able to do to make sure that your client gets the proper solution. And with that, let's just kind of talk quickly about some of the objectives. The first one for the employer is reward. It's very important to keep those key employees, so they want to provide significant perks to their selective employees. These plans are all discriminatory, so you can pick and choose who you want to cover, typically designed for your keyest of the key, your senior management, your highly compensated people. The employer also wants to make sure he retains those employees for the reasons we just discussed. Another thing is, some employers are going to want to do it, want or need a current income tax deduction. Others are going to be fine with deferring and getting the tax deduction on the back end. So we have that flexibility when it comes to plan design. What is the executive's objectives? They're interested in retirement income, supplement their qualified plan. The other thing is survivor protection. Most of these plans, depending on how it's structured, can give some death protection for the key executive or owner's family in the event of a premature death. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, who's going to guide you through our non-qualified executive benefit matrix, just kind of hit some of the high points and tell you what to look for and what plan might fit best for particular employer types that you're looking at. Dave?
All right, great. Thanks, Dave. And good afternoon, everyone. As Dave was saying, that fact finder is key when you call into advanced markets, because if we don't have the proper facts along with the employer's or the executive's objectives, it doesn't matter if we put together the most beautiful plan. If it doesn't resonate with the prospect, they're going to stay a prospect and not become a client. And in my career, which is a couple of decades, I boiled down most of the initial fact finding when the case first comes in to really 2 points from the employer's point of view. Do we want a handcuff on the executive so that we really tie him or her to the company, or is a current income tax deduction more important? That bit of information will direct us towards which type of plan we will likely propose that will then meet that current objective and make, hopefully, the prospect into a client. So if we want a current deduction and we're not as concerned with a handcuff, from the employer's point of view, that's an executive bonus plan. Now, who wants a current income tax deduction? Typically tax pass-through entities. Because if the employer is going to come out of pocket tens of thousands or even in a lot of cases hundreds of thousands of dollars, they would like a current income tax deduction for participating in that plan. Otherwise, when they put that $100,000 into the policy the first year, it's not deductible. So their K-1 will hit them with phantom income equal to that $100,000. So they're going to increase their current income tax because they didn't get a current income tax deduction. So once again, if it's a current deduction, it's a tax pass-through, it's an S-corp, it's an LLC, being taxed as a partnership, it's a partnership. Executive bonus is usually where we land. From the employee's point of view, well, executive bonus is fine with them, but they would prefer no out-of-pocket. So that's in reference to a single bonus versus a double bonus. A single bonus to pay the premium on the policy and a double bonus to also then pay the income tax on that first policy bonus. On the other hand, if the employer wants a handcuff and is less concerned about a deduction, then we would lean more towards these type of plans, a true deferral or a 401k lookalike. A SERP, which was covered yesterday, that stands for a supplemental executive retirement plan, or an endorsement split dollar. And sometimes we combine endorsement split dollar with a SERP, and we'll go through an example of that in a little bit. So those are the plans we would go to if off of the fact finder, the objectives, we find that a handcuff is more important than a current income tax deduction. These are the plans we typically land on. Employee really doesn't have any say in this. Now, what if we want a deduction and some level of handcuff? Well, we can sort of get there with what we call a REBA, a restricted executive bonus arrangement. And we'll talk about that a little later. It's not really a golden handcuff. It's more like a fuzzy handcuff as far as restricting the employee from leaving. And once again, the employee really has no input on that. So let's start out with an endorsement split dollar with a planned policy transfer at retirement. I see a lot of these requests, and Dave is going to go ahead and take us through. Oh no, wait a minute! I'm going to cover this part. I get this request quite often. It's fairly simple to implement. It's fairly simple to explain, and it's fairly simple to administer. What endorsement split dollar looks like is this is an employer-owned policy. It's a key man or a key person policy ensuring the life of one of our valued executives. Now, a key man policy typically is owned by the employer, paid premiums by the employer, and the employer is the beneficiary. That's the true definition of a key person policy. Now, what if the employer is willing to share some of that death benefit with the key executive and allow him or her to name beneficiaries for that portion that is shared? All of a sudden, we have become an endorsement split-dollared policy. Fairly simple to understand, and but there are some complications with it. Split dollar can be a little more complex than, for example, an executive bonus, but with proper guidance and administration, it should not be a problem. So from the employer's point of view, in an endorsement split dollar plan, the employer is the policy owner and pays all the premiums. Typically, retains death benefit equal to premiums paid. All the other death benefit is therefore endorsed to the executive to name the beneficiary for all death benefit above premiums paid. However, we can certainly have the employer retain additional death benefit. Well, why would that be important? Additional death benefit would not just recover the premiums that have been paid, but also provide key person insurance in the event that key person, in fact, died. The executive, under an endorsement split dollar plan, has the privilege of naming a beneficiary for a portion of that policy's death benefit, the amount that is endorsed under the agreement to the executive. Now, the cost of that for the executive is each year his or her W-2 is increased by what the IRS calls the economic benefit. Anytime an employer gives an employee something of value, the government would like to tax it. That's just a fact. So the employer here is giving something of value to the employee, death benefit. So they have figured out a long time ago what to call it, the economic benefit, and how to tax it. Now the good news is that the employee doesn't have to pay the economic benefit, the value of the death benefit that is afforded to them. Instead, they just increase their W-2 by that amount. Therefore, they pay income tax on the value, which might be, 25, 35% of what the value is. Economic benefit is not for us to discuss today, but it is a cost per thousand. It is typically calculated using the Table 2001, or if the carrier has an alternative term rate product, you can use that as well. If any of you on this call want to discuss economic benefit further, please call in and I would be happy to discuss it and explain it with you. However, this is not the proper venue to go that deep into economic benefit. So now I'm going to turn it back to Dave, and he's going to set up this example one, the facts for our case. Up to you, Dave.
All right. Well, first of all, we got too many Daves here, but we got John, who's a business owner who has a key executive, Dave, that he wants to reward and retain. Important, he wants to have a strong handcuff and provide Dave the opportunity for retirement income and also a continuing death benefit coverage. John really likes the idea of 100% forfeiture if Dave leaves too soon, the golden handcuff piece. John would also like the benefit to be cost neutral. John's got a few wants there, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to consider an endorsement split dollar with a planned policy transfer at retirement.
Okay, back to me. This is an endorsement supplemental illustration, endorsement split dollar supplemental illustration. These are the policy values based on the fact finder. We learned how much John is wanting to provide Dave in the future for his supplemental retirement purposes. So we got that from the fact finder, and he would like to supply Dave, beginning at age 65 or age 66 as it's calculated here, just under $200,000 per year for 15 years. So it's important when you're talking about your plan, the plan being endorsement split dollar, you've got to also choose the right policy to complete and fill up the plan. So here we've got our global accumulator IUL policy, which is designed for high cash value growth, which would then lead to larger supplemental retirement distributions during retirement phase. So you've got to pick the right policy to supplement your plan. We have calculated based on John's wishes, he would like to do a 10-pay, even though we're not going to start distributions on the policy for 15 years. And he's willing to contribute $100,000 per year for this policy. Now remember, John owns this policy. It's an employer-owned policy. Now, since the goal is to maximize cash values for distribution at retirement, I selected the minimum non-MEC death benefit, which in this case is $2.1 million. Now, you'll notice at year 11, after premiums suspend, I reduced the death benefit even further. The reason being, we're trying to minimize the cost of insurance. So from year 10 to year 11, the death benefit did in fact reduce on purpose. And then we can see that we have $194,000 and change each year that could be used for supplemental retirement income purposes once we transfer this policy to Dave. Now here's a different supplemental illustration showing the endorsement split dollar, where the employer's rights and benefits cost flow is on the left side and the executive, Dave, is on the right side. So you can see once again we've got $100,000 net premium payment each year for that 10-year period of time. And for that, John is retaining additional death benefit. He's not endorsing all death benefit to Dave. John is in fact retaining some of the death benefit above the $100,000. You can see he's $1 million over that $100,000 in the first year. That's key person coverage. The rest of it is endorsed over to Dave. And we scheduled how much death benefit Dave gets each year. You can see he's got $1 million for 5 years. For the next 5 years, he has $750,000. And then I was shooting for $500,000 a year for the remaining 5 years, but I came up just a little bit short in year 15, $473,000. Now notice that all of the policy's values are owned by the employer. Only death benefit is shared with the executive. As you can see, there is no surrender value on the death benefit on the employee's side until the policy is transferred. And you can see that we're transferring the policy at year 16. Now, what are the mechanics of that? Well, we do a change of ownership form from John to Dave. Once again, is that taxable? And the answer usually is the employer is providing something of value to our employee, so the answer is yes. It is taxable to Dave in the year of receipt. Now here's the executive's analysis. You can see that that economic benefit that I referred to is in play for each of the first 15 policy years. So every year that John is allowing Dave to designate a beneficiary for a portion of the death benefit, that is taxable benefit to Dave. Now he just is including that on his W-2 each year, which then increases his income tax due. You can see that for $1 million of coverage that first year, a 50-year-old is only paying $756 based on a 30% tax bracket. And you notice it goes up every year because the Table 2001 cost increases every year that our executive gets older. And here's what we have at the policy transfer. You see that there is a large income that is being had at the policy transfer. Why? Well, because a very cash surrender value heavy policy is being transferred from an employer to an employee, which then means that there's income tax due of almost $500,000. And we'll address what to do about that here in a little bit. From our employer's analysis, once again, $100,000 a year for the first 10 years, and then he gets a tax savings. He gets a deduction because he's transferring this fair market value rich cash item from himself as a corporate or an employer-owned key person policy to that key person. That key person is taking it into income in the year of transfer, and therefore our employer gets a deduction in that same year. Now, how did we come up with $420,000? It's a little technical, so I'm going to go through this quickly. There's a deduction. The cash value was $1.6 million. Our employer assumed tax rate is 42%. That's a $693,820 deduction. But wait a minute, how come we're only allowing him $420 according to the spreadsheet? Well, there's also a taxable gain that's a part of that transfer. Remember, we only had $1 million worth of basis in that policy. Total premiums paid were $1 million, but we transferred a fair market value of 1.6. So that $651,000 $952 is a taxable gain. So we've got a deduction of almost $700. We've got a gain of a little under $300. You net those two to get the $420,000 deduction that John is allowed in the year of transfer. Back to you, Dave.
Well, and the summary of this is, John obviously provided a significant benefit for Dave, and it had strong handcuff, which was important to John, because if Dave left early, he got nothing. John paid in $1 million, $100,000 for 10 years, and then he received he and the company received a $420,000 deduction. So John had key person coverage and cost recovery during the working years. Summary is, for the employee summary is, Dave received a valuable life insurance protection during his working years. He did not need to pay premiums during working years, only report the economic benefit, which you noticed was significantly less than the premium cost. Is a very valuable benefit if Dave has insurability issues, rated or whatever. And Dave has a large income tax due policy at policy transfer, but he can use the cash value for tax payment. John can provide a bonus if he wants to cover the tax, or if Dave's in the position, he can pay the tax out of pocket. And Dave can use this policy for retirement distributions or keep it for death benefit coverage. At that point, he owns it, he controls it.
Now, as an alternative, Dave, we could, instead of transferring the policy in 15 years, if John chose to retain the policy, keep it an employer-owned policy, he could institute a SERP, that Supplemental Executive Retirement Plan that you all talked about yesterday, and access the policy cash values to provide a stream of supplemental retirement income for Dave. Now, at that point, as you guys discussed yesterday, each payment, he accesses the policy cash values free of income tax through either withdrawals to basis and switching to policy loans, or starting with policy loans. So John takes the money out income tax free. Then when he provides a yearly retirement distribution to Dave, John, the employer, gets a deduction for that amount paid as reasonable compensation, and then Dave takes that into income each year as retirement income. We call this a split SERP because it's an endorsement split dollar combined with a SERP payment. And the SERP is instead of transferring the policy at retirement. It's just another option. If John wants to continue to control things, why give up the policy? Keep a 100% control. And then when Dave passes, John or the employer at that time receives death benefit that then gives cost recovery to John or the employer for all of their participation with this plan. It's kind of a slick deal. Now let's switch to executive bonus. This would once again maybe be appropriate for a tax pass-through entity. In my experience, a lot of tax pass-through entities want a current income tax deduction. Yeah, they like that future income tax deduction through the SERP payment, but they would prefer a current income tax deduction because that shields current income from taxes. The structure of an executive bonus is very simple. We have the key employee starts out as the owner of the life insurance policy. And as owner, of course, gets to name the beneficiary, has access to policy cash values, and the death benefit is that executive. The employer simply provides a bonus to pay the premium each year. Now, there are variations on that. It could be a single bonus, once again, equal to the premium. It could be a double bonus, which is a bonus equal to the premium plus a bonus equal to the income tax that the bonus on the premium causes. So that's all negotiable. And very often, I see it probably 50-50 where it's a single bonus or a double bonus. It kind of comes down to how much skin does the employer want the employee to have in the game. Is the employer willing to fund the premium 100% plus the income tax due? Or would the employer prefer the employee at least come out of pocket for the income tax on that bonus. Now, each year that that bonus is paid, whether it's single or double, key employee takes that into income, and therefore the employer gets that current income tax deduction to reduce the amount that will flow through on the K-1 to that employer each year. So the benefits for the employer on executive bonus is that they currently deductible benefit expense. This is a non-qualified benefit, so you can discriminate. You don't have to give this benefit to your rank and file. You can just keep it for your top hat, your 3, your 2, your 5 most important people that you want to reward and retain. There's no qualification or reporting. There are no annual administrative costs. It's much cheaper than a qualified plan. The detriment, and this is the big one, it's no handcuff. This is a permanent portable policy that our employee can leave with long before the anticipated retirement if and when he or she gets a better offer. So there is really no handcuff here. It's the permanent portable policy. For the key employee, the benefit is, oh, there it is, a permanent portable policy. Free to go anywhere, anytime. You get income tax-free access to the cash values. That's the benefit of life insurance. And an income tax-free death benefit. Once again, the benefit of life insurance. The detriment is you must be insurable. If you are, if you're rated, we can get you insurance, but it will be expensive. And if you're completely non-insurable, in those cases, usually they walk away, but once in a while I see a survivorship policy that would be sold in that situation. Back to you, Dave. Example 2.
All right, so in this case, example 2, we got John, the employer again, has his key executive, Dave, and he wants to reward and retain him. But John is less concerned about a handcuff and more concerned about a current income tax deduction. John happens to be a pass-through entity. So in this scenario, we would consider an executive bonus arrangement.
Okay, well, and here is our spreadsheet showing the inner workings of our executive bonus arrangement. We're using the exact same policy. We're just overlaying the policy with executive bonus instead of with endorsement split-dollar with planned policy transfer. So this is the exact same policy. And the employer side of the ledger here, you can see that that $100,000 is coming out each year for 10 years, but the cost of the bonus is not $100,000, it's only $58,000 because the employer gets to deduct the cost of that bonus as ordinary income to our executive. During that 10-year period of time, our employee has to include that income, that bonus as income each year. Now, this is a single bonus plan. You might remember that Dave had a 30% net income tax rate assumption. So each $100,000 that he receives, it's going to cost him $30,000 in income tax. And that's kind of phantom income. The $100,000 went in the policy, but he's got to come out of pocket $30,000. Now, an alternative to that would be, well, he could pay the $30,000 and then just put $70,000 into the policy. That's kind of we backed into a double bonus plan. So each year, Dave will have a $30,000 income tax hit, out of pocket $30,000. So let's see what it buys him. Once again, in year 16, we're assuming he's retiring at age 65. At that point, Dave can take out of the policy income tax-free $194,358 each year. Now, he owns this policy. He could take more earlier for a shorter period of time, or he could take less and preserve the death benefit. So this gives Dave a lot of flexibility. Does he need the supplemental retirement income, or does he need the death benefit? And so we provide Dave with some options in addition to just supplemental retirement income. All right, Dave?
So the key to this one, obviously, was John provided a significant currently tax-deductible benefit for Dave. John paid $100,000 annually for 10 years. His after-tax cost was $58,000. And John rewarded Dave with a substantial supplemental retirement income starting at age 66. You know, we saw it was almost $200,000 a year. And the key to this one too is Dave retires, he may want to buy a vacation home, take 300 out the first year and none after. I mean, he controls it, he owns it, he has all the flexibility. So in summary is Dave received a valuable life insurance benefit, life insurance protection during working years and beyond. He did not need to pay income tax on the annual $100K bonus received during his working years. Solution is the double bonus that Dave talked about. And Dave can use the policy for retirement distributions or keep for death benefit coverage. He controls the cards at that point, really throughout the whole process.
And Dave, were you asking about how could we get that fuzzy handcuff that we referred to in the beginning? Well, let me tell you. We have this restricted executive bonus arrangement, and you can see that nice picture of REBA there. This is an executive bonus arrangement set up exactly like we've already seen, but we have an additional written agreement between the employer and the employee. This endorsement is executed with the insurer that restricts the employee's use of the policy cash values. It does not give the employer the right to forfeit any of the values of that contract that the employee owns. So this is not a substitute for a golden handcuff plan like SERP, deferral, endorsement, split dollar. This instead merely restricts our employee from accessing those cash values. Well, why would that be important? Well, maybe if we're loading up this policy, we don't want Dave to take this policy that is now cash rich, leave us with his permanent portable policy, access those cash values, set up shop and compete against us. That would be counterproductive. So instead, we just merely restrict his rights to use the policy cash values until we say it's okay to use those cash values. Now, typically the endorsement is released on triggering events such as retirement, disability, a specified age, a specified number of years, death, well, we can't really keep him from accessing his cash values after death, or by mutual agreement. These are safeguards that give a fuzzy handcuff on Dave to not leave John. At least John is protected that he is not funding Dave's exit and to set up shop to own, to set up against him and compete against him, and still the client base, and he funded the whole thing. That just makes no sense. REBA can help with that. So it's the exact same structure, except we have a restrictive endorsement that is filed with the carrier that will prohibit the employee, Dave, from accessing those cash values until the employer, John, says it's okay, or by mutual consent or by agreement. So that really sums up what we were to talk about today. Hopefully you got a good feel for, number one, how important it is to give advanced markets good, solid fact finder information, not only the hard facts, what's the state of incorporation, what type of legal entity is it, how many employees are there, what is their annual gross income, but also the soft questions, the objective questions. Who's your most important people? When you go on vacation, who do you leave the keys with? Questions like that will then help us determine what those objectives might be so that we can put not a plan together, but an appropriate plan that matches and meets objectives detailed in the fact finder. So that's all I have to say, Dave. Do you have anything to wrap up with?
No, I think we drilled the importance of the fact finder. That's the key to all these sales. I think, Kyle, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we do have a few questions. So before we get to those questions, I want to thank both Dave and Dave for taking time today. I think that was great. I hope you guys learned a lot of good information. We have a couple of questions in queue here that I'll get to. If you have a question for us, please use that Q&A feature, and I'll feed those questions to both our presenters. Also, maybe people had joined a little bit later. We did record this session, so probably early tomorrow, you will get an email with the recording of the session along with the presentation that we used. So we'll make sure that you get that. A couple questions that came in. One was on the REBA, does that provide an immediate tax deduction to the employer?
You want me to take that one, Dave?
Sure, go ahead.
The answer is it should. I went to law school, so it's never yes or no. If it is set up properly, meaning that it does not give our employer any interest in the policy, it should be 100% tax deductible as a 162 bonus. We just got to make sure that we didn't cross any lines to provide any forfeiture provisions that would then disqualify the deductibility of the premium bonus. So yes, it should be.
Great. A couple questions came in. We will include the fact finder on the follow-up email as well too. So we'll make sure that's included. So you'll get the recording, the slides, and the fact finder. So we'll make sure that you get access to that. Dave Graham, we had another question about some of the written agreements. Does Global Atlantic provide any assistance with some of those written agreements that you mentioned?
Absolutely. Our agent portal has a whole host of specimen agreements that can be provided to the client to provide to their legal advisor in case they aren't necessarily up on this type of plan, that will aid them in the proper drafting of the plan. So the answer is yes. We can't write the agreement, but we certainly have these specimen agreements that will be helpful in that regard.
The last question that we had was kind of just a general, where does this work? What size of businesses? So, maybe with your guys' experience, where do you see kind of these strategies being utilized, or if you have a story or two or something that comes to mind that can maybe, spur in some creativity from for our listeners in terms of kind of where you see this being used.
Well, I'll start, but honestly, it can be one employee up to unlimited number. Most of them seem to be in that 2 to 3 to 10 person range, but you're not limited. I mean, there's no size restriction. It really depends on the employer. And we didn't get into the 409A plan, but if you guys do run into a larger employer, we can definitely help you with a true deferred comp plan as well. Those tend to be larger employers because there's a risk of forfeiture. I mean, there's not to get into the weeds, but there's a lot of reasons why a smaller, closely held company may not want to do a true deferred comp plan. You have anything to add on that, Dave? I mean, it's all over the board.
No, I fully agree. However, if you're trying to do our guaranteed issue program with our COLI department, we need at least 10.
Right.
And I think you guys kind of shared with it, but think of I think regional businesses where there's a lot of maybe there's 2 or 3 competitors where they kind of see a lot of movement between their recruiting is going to a competitor and getting their best person. So think about those businesses in your area where it's very competitive, where the recruiting they're throwing money at from a salary perspective. This is another angle that you can look at it, saying setting up that golden handcuffs or the fuzzy handcuffs. I never heard you refer to that as, Dave. I like that. Setting yourself up with strategies where there's businesses where there's a lot of poaching going on in terms of grabbing those high performing employees. Dave, you shared an example where it was a medical practice on the 101 call where that made sense. So yeah, I mean, and Dave mentioned it too, those rank and file employees, this is probably not for them. So you're looking at those businesses that have, sales executive, medical practices, doctors, the managers of those facilities. Think about those types of businesses where, a strategy like this might make sense.
And another one I just throw on there is startup or smaller companies. you know, they often have some all-star key employees, and I don't care what industry you're in, the big boys are going to recognize talent and they're going to try to steal them. And those are the people you want to keep. In the oil and gas industry here in Houston, it's a big problem, but it could be any industry. When you're a smaller company, it's hard for you to compete with a big company with all the supplemental benefits and executive benefits they can do without doing a program like this.
Great. Well, I think
I was going to say, somebody just mentioned they did one on a grocery store chain. I mean, again, it can be any business where there's competition.
And the great part is, you know, Dave Graham kind of alluded it to, and we can definitely, from a Global Atlantic carrier perspective, help you with some of these things. You know, our resources pages that we have, as Dave mentioned, out on globalatlanticlife.com, has a lot of this information, sample documents, case studies. You know, we showed you a fact finder, so definitely check out the website and get some information, more information, and then, you know, fill out those quality fact finders, get as much information as you can, and then have a call with Dave or someone else in our advanced markets team to kind of walk you through kind of what's the best strategy. You know, are there some additional questions you need to ask? You know, how can we help you with case design? A lot of great resources at Global Atlantic, so definitely leverage them. So with that, I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. The fact finder, the recording of the session, and the slides we'll provide to you tomorrow. For those of you that have been joining us for the summer training camp, next week, with it getting close to the 4th of July holiday, we're just going to have one session at Wednesday at this same time next week. So we'll only have one session next week. So be looking for the registration email for that coming out tomorrow. So I want to thank Dave Graham and Dave Reynolds. That was excellent. We really appreciate you helping us out today and sharing this information. And to all the attendees out there, thank you so much for joining us and taking time today. We appreciate your partnership, and really let us know what we can do to help you guys out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.